Welcome to another episode of Closed. I'm Lee. Today I'm really happy to have with us Danny Pearlstein, who's a seasoned advocate for better transit and urban policy in New York City, currently serving as the Policy and Communications Director at the Riders Alliance. He's here today to talk about what is surprisingly a very sexy topic these days, congestion pricing. So first off, Danny, thanks for being here today, and excited to talk about this topic with you for a few minutes.
Likewise, thanks so much for having me.
I don't think I've ever talked about congestion pricing for a few minutes, so um, this is going to be a first for me. I know it's not a first for you.
Consider yourself lucky.
But before we get to the topic, can you talk a little bit about the Riders Alliance, what you do there, how you got involved in this type of enterprise?
Sure. So Riders Alliance is a grassroots organization of subway and bus riders holding our elected officials accountable for public transit that is reliable, affordable, accessible. And we do it not just for its own sake, but because it means a more just and more livable city. And because transit is New York's superpower and we want to keep it, we want to build on it and expand on that and really lean into it. I came to the organization around 7 years ago as a staff member, but I joined about 10 years ago as a grassroots member. I was a staffer in the city council at the time, and I met a Riders Alliance organizer who was incredibly charismatic and compelling, and we couldn't do, what she wanted on a policy level, but I was excited to join as a member. My colleague at the time joined as a member too. And, when my then boss retired from politics a few years later, I came on staff, and it's been very exciting. I'm the first policy and communications director. I do a lot of publicity for our work. I help strategize. I do some direct advocacy, and it's really a privilege to do this work.
Well, I want to talk about congestion pricing. It's been in the news. I think in the X generation, people maybe only see like the two line sound bites about what's been happening with it. And if you're like me and many others who take the train into the city, even take the subway, might not have any idea as to what's really going on. So, what is congestion pricing? What's the controversy? What's happening with it right now?
Well, it's just like you said, right? Transit should be seamless, and yet it's not, right? The subway requires a huge amount of fixing and upgrading to make up for really generations of deferred maintenance. And, when it reached a crisis point several years ago after train delays had quadrupled, under the former governor from 2012 to 2018, you know, he couldn't look away anymore. And riders did our work connecting the dots between him and the problems at the MTA. And so Governor Cuomo at the time said congestion pricing is an idea whose time had come, having opposed it beforehand and actually, opposing it after that. But it was a program that was kicking around for many decades in New York City, really since the middle of the last century, to put a toll cordon around the busiest part of Manhattan that has the best transit in the country to help improve the flow of traffic, clear the air of pollution, and pay for transit upgrades that are essential to keeping our system going well into its second century. And right now, our congestion pricing program, as legislated and implemented, puts a $9 toll for cars. It's higher for trucks. It's lower in the middle of the night around Manhattan south of 60th Street, excluding the perimeter roadways, the West Side Highway, and the FDR Drive, right? So if you're coming over the Brooklyn Bridge and coming up to where I live in Inwood, you get right on the FDR, you don't pay. But if you get off, instead of getting on the bridge, if you get off by City Hall, you pay, as soon as you go down the exit ramp. And it's working exactly according to plan. It's astonishing. A lot of people, it's turning a lot of heads from people who opposed it or people who hadn't paid much attention to it. But for the folks in the know, and when we work with people who've been pushing this idea since before we were born, they're just really happy and impressed and satisfied with its performance because it's reducing congestion meaningfully. It's bringing in a lot of money to fix the subway, and it's speeding up essential services like ambulances. It's speeding up buses. So transit riders with some of the worst commutes anywhere in the country, from Central Jersey, from Eastern Queens, aboard express buses, are some of the first people to experience the joys of congestion pricing.
And why does the big story obviously is that President Trump and his administration have been pushing to end congestion pricing in New York City. So far, Governor Hochul has been resistant, and it's still in place. Why does the administration? It might be hard to get into the head of this administration. Why do they want to put a stop to this?
So,
What's the stated reason, and do you believe the stated reason? Is there some ulterior motive here?
Well, with congestion pricing, it's always important to get a snapshot of history. It is a federal approval was needed for congestion pricing because there's a usual prohibition on tolling roads because
Hmm.
feds put money into pretty much every part of the road network. And usually the deal with the states is you can't slap a toll on it if the feds have paid for it. But there is a waiver program to waive that typical prohibition. It's called the Value Pricing Pilot Program. It was created during the first Bush
And say
administration.
that five times fast.
VPPP, and created in 1991 during the first Bush administration. During the second Bush administration, the feds actually tried to induce New York to set up congestion pricing. They dangled $354 million for cameras in front of the mayor of New York City, Mike Bloomberg, and he tried hard to push it through the legislature, but he actually failed because the Democratic Assembly Speaker opposed it at the time. So it was this sort of moderate Republican policy, but it's gotten caught up, in successive waves of populism. And also, I think in some of the things that motivate that populism, particularly on the right, which are jealousy and envy, right? Look at the governor of New Jersey, a moderate Democrat, fiercely opposed to congestion pricing because he doesn't want us to have nice things. And he doesn't want folks to have to help pay for that, even though people from New Jersey are experiencing some of the best benefits. The wait time of the Holland Tunnel has been slashed in half by congestion pricing, but this guy doesn't notice because he's up in a helicopter. Similarly, I think on New York, we have members of Congress on the Republican side who are desperate for change in Albany and to elect a Republican governor, Republican senators. They don't want Democrats to produce results,
Mhm.
right? And I
So
think that
so it's
yeah.
political. There's no real policy reason
And
underlining why.
the reason it's political in a couple ways. One is I think from what we can tell, the Trump administration is less motivated to scrap this than they are to do a lot of the other sort of shock and awe, move fast and break things they're doing
Sure, if
because
it's Greenland or congestion pricing, they prefer
exactly. Exactly, but I think they want to throw a bone to Mike Lawler. He's one of the most vulnerable Republicans in the House. He has a good shot at the Republican nomination for governor of New York, and if New York is if New Yorkers are still furious by the end of next year, maybe he'll become the governor. But
right.
he needs to prevent this governor from having any solid wins, and the president wants to throw him a bone in turn, so he'll do things like gut Medicare and slash taxes, which are not super popular in his district, which went for Joe Biden by 15 points.
Um, what kind of data is there? I know the program is relatively new. Is there quantifiable data? When Hochul sat down with President Trump, not that he necessarily would listen to the data, but did she have strong data to present to him at this point to say this is working and here's why? What are like the two or three data points that you really point to?
So, the most compelling data point is probably that wait times at the Holland Tunnel during rush hour, the portal coming from Jersey City into New York, are down 48%. The revenue figure is about $50 million in the first month. Um, Bus speeds are up, bus ridership is up, subway ridership is up, commuter rail ridership is up. This isn't primarily a program to nudge people onto the subway, although that's how it's sometimes characterized, but it's having that effect. Subway safety has risen too. There's a number of different reasons for that, probably, but one of them is strength in numbers, safety in numbers, more eyes on the train cars. So the governor presented a lot of data to the president, but he went in pretty committed to his position, and I think she said that the data ultimately was not where the conversation lay.
Yeah. I want to play a video. I don't even know what to call it. That the transportation secretary put together, I guess, to defend the administration's position that congestion pricing is not working for the average New Yorker. Let's take a listen to it. Then I want to talk about your response to it.
And I think with raised toll prices, raised train fares, now you want to add like tolls on the streets, I think it's definitely borderline stealing.
It's ridiculous. It's destroying the city. I think it sucks.
It makes it more expensive for me to come to work. Very bad for business.
End it for sure.
End it. End it.
End it.
So I guess the tagline there is "End it." What's your? I don't know who those people were, if they're paid actors or real New Yorkers, but is there any validity to any of those arguments? If you're putting your opposition hat on for a second, which I know you're not, you're fiercely in favor. What what are the drawbacks, of any, and what do you think? What's the response to New Yorkers who might not even be thinking that way, but watching some of the administration's materials and starting to change their position because they're persuaded? What's the response?
Well, first of all, if you produce a video like that, you're losing the argument, right?
Yeah.
You only do that out of a position of desperation. This guy's the transportation secretary. He's not still a reality TV star. He doesn't need to do something like that unless it's for show. And I think this is for show. You notice there's no women in the video, right? Millions of commuters in New York City are women, for starters, but millions more are public transit riders. And that includes, women and men, obviously. And transit riders.
They're all like hard hat people. And I know from taking the train early in the morning, the hard hat people are typically taking the train. They're not
Right.
driving into the city.
That's right. So even people, right, who work in heavy industry, even people with toolboxes, which was often used as an example for why you have to drive, take the train because almost 9 out of 10 commuters into Manhattan take the train. And maybe now it is 9 out of 10 because a few people have switched. And those who don't, by and large, favor the program. The people who like the program the most, 2 out of 3 of them like the program the most, is people who are paying the toll regularly because they're the ones saving the most time. If you go back, when we had polling from before the program was implemented, there was a majority opposition. It was majority statewide. 44% of respondents said they never come to Manhattan. So what this is playing on is the fact that there is widespread jealousy of New York City and antipathy to programs like this from people who don't have anything to do with them. And so there is a sense of you don't want somebody else to have nice things. Well, the fact is we're in a crisis. We're at a breaking point. The whole state is heavily dependent on our economy. Our economy hinges on public transit. It hinges on a reduction in gridlock. We need congestion relief, right? We can't put up with this. And it doesn't matter, folks, furious about this, 100 miles away, or even a handful of people in the congestion zone, are ultimately benefiting from this. This is good for our economy. It's good for the quality of our air, right? This is going to reduce respiratory healthcare costs. It's going to keep people out of the hospital. We need this.
So it sounds like the part of my question was: is there a decent counter argument to the policy? It sounds like the answer to that is no.
Right. I think the answer is no. I think that, it's funny. One of the things they didn't touch on, I mean, the first person said, he talked about rising tolls and rising train fares before this. So that's obviously someone, if they're a real person, it's obviously someone who pays the train fare. They recognize that.
He's a real person, whether or not he really means what he says.
Right. Right. But I think, one, this is important because we can't just hike the fare out of our crisis, right? It's a social good to have people on public transit. It's not so socially good to have people driving in the most congested part of the country, right? People need a little bit of a nudge to consider, do I need to take this trip? Is this an essential trip, or can I cancel it or combine it with something else? That's what this program does. I think there's some concern, although the secretary didn't raise it, but the widespread opinion is there's cynicism about the MTA. Right? The MTA was created as a punching bag. It was created so elected officials could avoid accountability. And now everybody loves blaming it for all their problems, even though it's an essential service. It employs tens of thousands of people. It moves millions of people every single day. It's the transit system that we have. And no, it's not perfect, but we need to invest in it in order to improve it.
So you're on a show with a lawyer. So we need to talk about the legal side of this. This is going to go to a court at some point, I would guess. What's your understanding of how strong the New York State's legal position is here?
So congestion pricing is no stranger to court, right? There have been many, many cases against it. Pretty much everybody who's anyone drives, and so they have access to lawyers. The state of New Jersey has already spent over $1 million, and they've made a lot of arguments in both New York and New Jersey, and actually on appeal briefly even in Pennsylvania from the New Jersey case right before the program started. A lot of arguments about the sufficiency of the environmental review. And, the environmental review was exhaustive. It went on for years. It involved tens of thousands of pages of documentation, multiple federal agencies. And so the program passed muster there. Now the program is back in court. Again, it's no stranger to court, neither are we, right? We're back in court with it. We filed a motion to intervene yesterday on a completely different question. Going back to the point I raised before about the program back to 1991 is the program legal at all, right? And so USDOT is taking a totally new tack that New Jersey's incredibly expensive lawyers didn't touch because of how absurd of an argument it is. That in fact, you can't do cordon pricing of this sort at all, even though it's right there in the regulations. And the last, Republican administration tried to pay New York to start the program under these regulations, and arguing that you can't spend the money on public transit, even though that is envisioned again by the program. So, their arguments don't pass the laugh test, and so the MTA went into court the same day for a declaratory judgment, confirming that. They drew a judge that's very familiar with the program, very familiar with New York City, has sat on these cases now for over a year. We feel very confident in our position. And, we came into the case to add a couple things. One was that, riders have a unique stake in this, not just the transit agency, but riders were already winning on bus service. We have the expectation of doing much better on subway service because of this program. And, we expect to prevail. I think that the administration has taken some pretty bizarre arguments, and we expect to prevail. What ultimately happens at a higher level is harder to predict, beyond the judge who's already familiar with the program. And of course, we don't know what other retaliatory steps they might try and take if they lose, right? They lash out at their enemies some of the time. They could perceive us as enemies, even though we're just trying to be responsible. The secretary has also said he likes user fees. This is obviously a user fee for the transportation system in New York City.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're optimistic or bullish as to the future of this program. I know, again, it doesn't impact me, but anecdotally, I think I hear that most New Yorkers are in favor. The real New Yorkers, not the one in Transportation Secretary's video. By the way, apropos of nothing, I just wanted to read a quote from Governor Hochul's spokesperson about this, which I think was just really funny. He said, Sean Duffy's professional experience in transportation came from driving a Winnebago on a reality TV show in the late 90s. Just a great line. Great burn.
It is. It isn't. It's funny. I was listening to him this morning, and he was talking about how we need money to pay for infrastructure upgrades. Right? He was like pushing back against the sort of Doge lunacy that we can just cut our way out of everything, and saying like, look, a lot of our infrastructure looks dilapidated compared to other countries. And I think that's what people were responding to in New York, which is New Yorkers travel. New Yorkers see first-rate public transit systems that are properly maintained in other parts of the world, many other continents, and they come back here. And our subway is iconic. It's an incredible workhorse. It's our superpower, but we haven't taken care of it.
Yeah.
And the chickens are roosting.
It's interesting. I think one of the arguments that I saw him make I forget if it was in the New York Times article or elsewhere, it was that the issue is that the money should be going into repairing roads, not into the transit system. Is there a grain of truth there? Do you think that there's a compromise to be had where the money could be divvied up and used to address roads as well?
I mean, money is fungible, but the fact is, if we reduce our traffic, we're investing in our roads because we have to maintain them less often.
Right.
And if there's less wear and tear on the roads because, really the wear and tear is caused by heavy construction and trucks and stuff like that sitting on our roads, sitting stuck in traffic behind cars. If we can get the cars out of the way, those vehicles are moving. They're not idling. They're not weighing down the pavement. There's any number of ways you could slice this up, but I think what we can't compromise is how far we've come. Right? We've sped up our bus service, which was the worst in the country. We've reduced the kind of idling that is bad for our public health. We're raising money to fix the subway. What we've said throughout, the haters were desperate. Come up with something innovative. Well, the fact this is innovative, right? This is the first time it's been done in North America. Obviously, it was very difficult politically to get it to the finish line. We did that. It's performing admirably well. It's turning heads constantly. None of the haters have a reasonable solution, a reasonable alternative. They're just sort of frustrated that they're wrong or that they also don't have this.
Right. So assuming that this survives legal challenges, which again, it sounds like you're bullish it will, what's the next big transportation issue that you're looking to tackle or that New York City needs to tackle? What's next?
I mean, the challenge is that we need to keep fixing the subway, right? JP Morgan Chase did an analysis about a year ago, and they said, look, the subway is $1.5 trillion asset. If it were privately held, it would probably be getting $23 billion in capital upgrades each year. The MTA is barely hitting 10 to 15. So we're still playing catch up, and we're not even catching up. Right. What we now need for the next tranche of subway upgrades that the MTA has in the pipeline is more than twice as much money than congestion pricing is bringing in. And because of the way iteratively we've funded these upgrades, we need yet another funding source, a new funding source. And so what we're hopeful is that the governor will use her newfound strength and political capital from the success of this program to win more money in the state budget this year. And she's in the driver's seat, right? She presents the executive budget. She dominates the negotiations. She controls the MTA. It's her responsibility to find the money. In the previous administration, the governor helped push congestion pricing over the line in the legislature. We need her to do something similarly Herculean now, really, in the next few weeks.
This is just my opinion as someone who's been taking the subway for, 25 years, and pretty regularly and reliably, I take it. Is there a way to address? So obviously we have this toll in place for cars, and it's helped significantly. There's a toll, obviously, to use the subway. I'm not advocating to increase that toll, but obviously there's a lot of misuse with respect to people not paying that toll to get into the subway. That fix seems to me like it would address many issues if there was an efficient way to ensure that people are actually using people are paying to use the subway every time. I don't know how you do it without massive investment in law enforcement, but is that something that you've looked at or thought about?
It is. I mean, and we have made the massive investment in law enforcement, and it hasn't had the effect that we had hoped.
Right.
So we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in law enforcement. Now on the books is a plan to spend about $1 billion to upgrade the fare controls so that they're harder to defeat, that it's harder to enter the system, so it's less porous while still being safe. But you have to spend money to make money. And that's the challenge, is that both on the operating side in terms of the law enforcement, on the capital side in terms of the fare controls, right? These are major, major investments. And, for all the cynics saying, oh, the MTA is leaving all this money on the table, not for lack of trying, right? They worked really hard to do this. They hired, private security on top of the NYPD. The governor sent state police. She sent National Guard. It hasn't moved the needle, but I think that you're right. I think, the fare is about to rise to $3, within a year or so. There is a challenge of fare evasion, but it's a little bit difficult to pin down what it is, how bad it is. It's probably more significant on buses, but again, it's harder to measure on buses because there's no fare gate. And ultimately, there's a lot of very low-income people, and we don't believe that ability to pay should be a barrier to riding transit. We need people to access needs, to access their opportunities in order to have a better life in New York. And we are big supporters of discount programs, to help people on board. And more may need to be done there, right? The city is already spending, close to $100 million a year on fare discounts. And there are other ones that the state pays for. But that's a part of the puzzle. Another part of the puzzle is, changing the norm so that the subway is not a place of last resort for people who have nowhere to go, either at night or during the day.
Yeah.
Because, all too visible are our housing crisis, our healthcare crisis on the subway. And some people won't ride because of that. Obviously several million people pay every day to ride the trains. That's how we, collect several $1 billion in fares every year, which the MTA still does despite all the rhetoric. But again, we also need investments to help people off of and out of the subway, into appropriate housing and other types of care.
Yeah.
And we don't yet have that where it needs to be either. And this is a real challenge we have. The city has really iconic public spaces, but they're under duress because of other, breakdowns in care.
Yeah, all these issues intersect. You have people with nowhere to go, so they go on the subway. Then you have potential riders who are like, I don't feel safe in the subway, so I'm going to drive, which leads to congestion in Ubers or taxis or driving their own cars. So yeah, there's this almost cyclical nature of the problem, and it's hard to figure out what to address first in order to make it better. But certainly congestion pricing, I think, is a key step in the process, and we appreciate everything you're doing and coming on to talk about it a little bit. So thanks so much.
You bet. Thanks so much for having me.
If people listening want to hear more about the Riders Alliance, how they can help, I know it's a not-for-profit, how they can be of assistance or just learn more about what you're doing, where should they go, what should they do, what should they listen to?
we are a grassroots organization. We're dependent on contributions of time, of money, of other resources. It's all on our website, ridersalliance.org. You can meet an organizer. You can find out about an event. You can take an action, right, to help, advance better, more reliable, more affordable public transit. So please do visit our website, ridersalliance.org.
Danny, thank you very, very much. This is great. And have you back on maybe a year from now to talk about how things are going. Okay.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Polino on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.